All right.
Yeah, everybody's coming in. Give them a minute.
Fascinating.
This might be a Penn State record of 30 attendees on the last session of the conference.
Right? The last session, last day.
Yeah. All right.
Are we between people and happy hour? Is that?
So we're at about 50 now. So let's get started. Welcome everybody to the Vision Zero systems approach to safety session. We have a pretty good presentation today. We have two presentations to cover Vision Zero, but look at it from a little different lens and get out of the X's and O's of the engineering, but look at the systems that go into our transportation networks. Look at the vulnerable users. Look at the cultural impacts to these plans that we put together and these decisions that are made, and really look at it in a broader light than just the X's and O's of speeds and crosswalk widths and those kind of things. So with that, we have like I said, two presentations today. The first one is going to be Seth Loginus. Seth is with the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center, and he's going to present on the safe systems approach, looking at the kind of the best practices of what's going on both here in the United States and abroad. So Seth, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see here. All right, can everyone see the slides there?
Yep.
All right, great. Thanks, Joe, and welcome everybody, especially given the last day and the last session of this awesome conference. As Joe was saying, that we're going to be speaking a little bit about Vision Zero and safe systems approaches, both in the United States and abroad. So one of the things we do at UNC, where I work, is that we kind of track where this is happening in the US and what the kind of international experience is as well, kind of simultaneously. We know to date there's a lot of interest in Vision Zero, about 15% of mid to large cities, and this grows and it changes all the time. These are cities of 100,000 population or more. They've adopted Vision Zero in the US. That 15% number is actually really significant, given that that's right around the mark called critical mass, where it becomes self-organizing and it really takes off. So we expect within the next couple of years, Vision Zero will be in far more places than it is today. Norway, in Oslo, Norway, they kind of realized Vision Zero in 2019. There was one fatality they had that entire year that was basically a medical condition of the driver driving into a fence that was really sort of unavoidable. But otherwise, they did actually realize, and they've become an inspiration and told their story about how they've achieved Vision Zero. Really, when you think about it, no one being gravely injured or dying on our roads has a lot of moral weight. Really, for a lot of places, it should be the only goal. There's a few powerful forces I want to just touch upon that are countering our potential Vision Zero gains, however. One is what's happening on the vehicle side. When we look at the distribution of the purchased vehicles and the manufactured vehicles, this comes from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. We see that there's a major shift toward higher horsepower vehicles, as well as higher profile and larger SUV type vehicles. If you look back in the 80s and the early 90s, it was really difficult to find a vehicle that was more than 200 horsepower. Today, that's the most common vehicle type. And we're getting into the 400 and 500, 600 even horsepower vehicles, really powerful machines out there on the roadways. As you can imagine, that affects everybody that's using the roads. There's a focus often in land development. So this comes from traffic impact analyses. The traditional approach here, right, is that we look at the motor vehicle level of service, or LOS, and that becomes kind of the focal point for land use development. What we're really thinking about in systems is, what if it were really about the safety of all different types of road users, of all different abilities and ages? What if that became the focal point, or the affordance? So do people have choice in how they get to places, and do so safely and comfortably? Those sorts of questions. We see in the media a kind of a common frame around blaming victims of injury. This just is one example of many of cyclists in critical condition being struck in Brooklyn. And one of the focal point of this was that the person, the riding the bike, was not wearing a helmet. What this signals to readers or people viewing this on television is that the cause of the crash is the person wasn't wearing a helmet. This puts the blame almost solely on the cyclist rather than thinking about the system in which this happened. Which we know when we do this, when we kind of victim blame or put it on just individuals, as we're calling it safety individualism, it really does help shape public discourse. If we keep blaming individuals, almost no one's going to be calling for system change. In this experiment by Tara Goddard, Kelsey Ralph, and their colleagues, they found that when you change it, the frame of a message of a crash event to the system itself, a lot more people will start calling for change to the roadway environment, to policy. We have a continuing trend. In the last couple of decades, we've seen across the board shift toward higher posted speed limits on our rural interstate system. And we know every time that happens, there's actually an increase in fatal crashes. This is almost a causal relationship. More and more we see this, and it's a troubling trend. So these are just forces that are really kind of challenging us to achieve Vision Zero. And then, of course, these sort of disruptive technologies, at least in the before times, if you will, before COVID, we had a lot of ride hailing, increasingly so, often substituting for other trips. What is serving one problem, maybe waiting for transportation or a package, brings a whole host of other problems when you think about the system: traffic congestion, degraded air quality, road user safety, when you have more vehicles out there on the road. And system science, complexity science, is really new to the field. So because it's so new, we haven't had a lot of time to experiment with the safe systems kind of approach. So this is just a look at a lot of the academic literature looking at these certain terms: systems thinking, complex adaptive systems, and systems science. Looked in the abstracts, the titles, and keywords in the two fields. We have two different search indices. PubMed is more on your medical and health kind of studies, and TRID is from the transportation research. So we see this in PubMed. I haven't added yet the full content of 2020, that's why you see that drop there. But you see a significant rise in the past decade and more in use of these terms in PubMed. And then in TRID, it looks like this. And we see a little bit of a spike there in the late 70s, early 80s. That had to do mostly actually with systems, airspace systems, an airplane. So there was actually a lot of complex adaptive systems thinking and work done in cockpits and airplanes back then. Nonetheless, there are signs that, different elements and different partners in the system are getting together and coordinating their goals and action. That's one of the key tenets of safe systems. One, if we start at the top, at a national level, we have the Road to Zero. Many of you might be familiar with this. They put out a report a couple of years ago called the Road to Zero, and just like their name, and it was really a vision document. They had three kind of approaches to this: double down on what works, accelerate advanced technology, and then prioritize safety. The last one is about kind of a safety culture. Toward zero deaths, this has been around for a little more than a decade. This approach is usually adopted and used by state DOTs to talk, and they have a focus on a lot of the same things that Safe Systems and Vision Zero adopting cities focus on. But of course, their orientation is more toward commerce and interstate system as well. So there's a bit of a difference between what states are tending to concern themselves with vis-a-vis the municipalities and regions. Which gets me to the Vision Zero cities. And so early I said, about 15% of these mid and larger size cities have adopted Vision Zero. This is a map from the Vision Zero network that's very helpful for us to understand. I understand our friends from Lancaster will be speaking next, and they're about to make this map, are working toward that at least. So we look forward to updating this and then presenting on it again. Now we go from the US context to some work we've done internationally, just really understanding how safe systems, Vision Zero, sustainable safety, these different programs that are very much all have the same goal. They've had a couple of decades of experience in this, and we really wanted to learn from them. The early adopting places are on the right there, Sweden, Australasia, you have Australia, New Zealand, and the Netherlands. We asked them kind of a set of questions about motivation, what exactly they did to implement the safe systems or Vision Zero approach, what kind of challenges did they see, and what recommendations. These sorts of things we're really trying to understand kind of the milieu in which Vision Zero was realized in these places. From that, we distilled a lot of the kind of lessons and themes. Some of these will look familiar because they are really consistent with safe systems and Vision Zero principles. I'm going to touch upon each of these, provide some examples, what that actually looks like on the ground. And then we can kind of discuss what that means for practice and how we kind of transform our practice. So the first one, of course, is that the human body has known and limited ability to tolerate crash forces. There's been a fair amount of study on this. You've probably seen schematics very similar, or this one. Basically, there is a direct correlation between speed and survivability to crash, right? So if the average pedestrian is struck at 40 miles per hour, they have about a 10% chance of living versus a 90% chance of living if they're struck at 20 miles per hour. This actually changes with age. So as people age, they become quite a bit more fragile. So even at 30 miles per hour, they can have a far greater chance than 50% of dying. So it's something to take in consideration in our designs and our speed management plans. From our colleagues in Australia, we have this interesting approach looking really at the kinetic energy and crash angle. So when you think of an example would be thinking about installing a right slip lane. That's going to address that the rear end crash types. But as you can see here, these are not the primary concern. It's probably not going to lead to a fatality. What we're really concerned with is 90 degrees plus up to 210 to 270 degree angles. These are the types of angles that we want to either eliminate or severely temper. It's wonderful to see NACTO, or the National Association for City Transportation Officials, put out this guidance recently on the city limits. You might be familiar with this guidance. So this is mostly for an urban context, but as you can see, they're creating a matrix around conflict. This is conflict of different road users and different types of road users. And activity levels. So where you have a high level activity and high conflict density, you really want to temper the speeds and bring them down to about 20 miles an hour. Where you have low conflict density and low activity, you can probably bring it up to 35 in an urban context. So this just provides some really clear guidance from the literature and studies on how we manage that kinetic energy in our networks. And it's very consistent, again, with some of this work, again, by our Australian colleagues. They do a lot of good work around safe systems intersection design principles. As you can see there, they talk about the speeds. If it's above a certain threshold, they talk about basically separating different road users. So people outside of cars should not be exposed to vehicles going more than 20 miles per hour, which is really a striking statement, right? If you have to go above that for various purposes, you want to separate them in space. And then you talk about crash angle, as we had seen earlier, if it's above 30 miles per hour. And then 40 to 45, 40, 35, we talk about crash angles, but also the homogenization of vehicle weights. So if we have really large tractor trailers with small cars and people, then we really have to consider, separating them in space or time. This one's kind of a critical one, and it's really rooted in human factors and psychology. The errors are far more complex than just poor choices. Often that's what we hear, is that people made a poor choice. There's a difference here from a lot of the work in human factors, is that there's active failures, which are things like slips, lapses, vigilance decrement, which is basically checking out after about 20 minutes, or hearing someone boring like me talk for 20 minutes. You just kind of zone out. These are all rooted in human biology, and you can't really design your way out of them. Mistakes, however, are more passive things, and they are very consistent misreadings of the environment. So suggesting that if there's a lot of mistakes in a place, that it's not really designed well for humans. So we have to really take that into consideration. When we look at the way the Dutch and the Danes design, they really talk a lot about self-explaining roads. Thiers talks about this in terms of 3 defining principles of self-explaining roads, which are really easily recognizable. You know it upon seeing it. Distinguishable from other ones. So you know that this street is different from that street, and the users are probably going to be different, and the speeds will probably be different. And then interpreted. Automatically, the elements of the design of the physical environment, they cue people to behave in certain ways, in safe ways. So these are some just basic principles. And in their Crow manual here, the Dutch have really nicely illustrated examples of what they're talking about. One of which is continuous sidewalks. So in Cambridge, Massachusetts, actually, they're doing this quite a bit, where over a driveway or over a minor street from the major street intersection, you just continue the sidewalk. This makes pedestrians to drive more visible to drivers, as well as basically encourages drivers to slow down, because they have to go up the ramp there. It makes it a lot easier for people in wheelchairs. They don't have to go down into the street and then back up. They continue on their way. It's just a really nice way of improving safety at these points, which tend to be not so safe for pedestrians in a lot of locations. Other examples, and I wish this example had a continuous sidewalk, but it does not. The gateway treatment, right? We've all kind of seen this, where there's things in the environment, physical measures like bulb outs or median treatments, where you're cued to slow down. There might be some signage, though that doesn't tend to matter nearly as much as the physical and the surface treatments. One of the things the Dutch also like to do is a lot of colored and textured surfaces, so you know exactly where you are, where you're entering. It very much cues a slowing down, a looking and being vigilant of who is around you. So really, when we talk about systems, we have the design element, we have what's happening at the top. So if we look over here at the iceberg, often what we see are the crash events or the injuries. But below the surface is what's driving these things, right? It's the patterns of behavior, the trends that we see, and how people are getting around, the system structure. So when we look at the below surface factors like land development policy, the density diversity of land use, minimum parking requirements. Is there way too much parking in an area, which basically we know induces cruising for parking, which means there's more vehicles circulating out there, which means more risk for crashes. Transportation priorities, who are we building and designing for? Affordable housing. And a lot of times when we talk with people that are trying to build a coalition around Vision Zero, we say, who the affordable housing people, are they involved at the table? Because if people have to travel a long way to go, they're also becoming part of traffic, and they're also contributing risk to the network. If we can bring in affordable housing close to jobs, close to where they can get healthy foods and care. Of course, our geometric design practices, our design manuals, all these things that drive practice, and then workplace policies. These are just some examples. There's many more. But once these practices, policies, procedures that all the sectors working in the system start aligning our goals and start working together, we can strengthen the system and really multiply the effects, the safety effects of them. So with that, I'll end on that note and thank you, and take any questions you might have. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Seth. If anybody has any questions for Seth, they can use the Q&A function, and we'll see what we can do to get those answered for you when we get our next presentation up. Just a minute.
I can stop sharing, and if people got my information there, we can always share it out as well.
Okay. Yeah, we can get Kristen and Cindy up, and as the questions come in, we can maybe look to do those towards the end here. The second part of our presentation today is going to be with Cindy McCormick. She's the city engineer and deputy director of public right-of-way for the city of Lancaster, and Kristen Saunders from Tool Design Group, and they're going to present on what is likely the newest Vision Zero maybe in the nation, having just been adopted just a couple of weeks ago for the city of Lancaster. So I'll turn it over to Kristen and Cindy.
All right, can everyone see my screen? Great. Hi, my name is Kristen Saunders. I am a senior planner with Tool Design Group, and I worked with Cindy on Lancaster's Vision Zero plan, and I'll let Cindy introduce herself as well.
Hi, my name is Cindy McCormick. As I work in the Department of Public Works for the city of Lancaster, and we're excited to kick off this plan.
Yeah, and I think we might be this might be the newest plan, but it might also be the smallest city that's done a Vision Zero plan as well, which I think is really exciting, and it was really great to work with Lancaster to take this on. So I know Seth talked a lot about Vision Zero, but just a reminder for everyone, and it's an approach to transportation safety that accepts no loss of life or serious injury in the transportation system. And one thing or a couple of things that are really important to Vision Zero are this leadership and commitment from leadership at every level, but especially at a very high level, as well as safe roadways and safe speeds, which is something that everyone on this call and at this conference is probably very good at, being a large group of engineers and planners, but also a data-driven and systems approach, which Seth touched on a little bit. I'm actually going to turn it over to Cindy first to talk a little bit about how this leadership commitment has worked in Lancaster in the past, as well as with Vision Zero.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, before we embarked on our Vision Zero plan, we strive to have a strong connection to our community at all times. I'm going to walk through a few of those examples where we are taking this multidisciplinary approach to Vision Zero, as well as other challenges within the city. First, our Mayor Sirachi was elected in 2018, and she came up with the block by block initiative, where we're looking at strong neighborhoods, secure income, sound government, and one of the major priorities was safe streets. She also created a new department of neighborhood engagement. So wanting to engage with the neighbors was one of the major priorities of her election. So Lancaster knows that our residents often know best, and we have continually provided funding opportunities for them to improve their community. This includes a Love Your Block program that was easy for residents to access and take pride in their neighborhood. Residents were also able to apply for mini grants to help beautify their streets through cleanups, facade improvements, adding simple things like trash cans. And then this led to other projects such as piloting, different size trash cans that people needed for their locations, or even paving and sidewalk work through grants and other funding sources. In addition to Love Your Block, we had a wide range of programs on our website that were funded and easy to use. We tried to make meaningful connections between people in Lancaster and their city government through user-friendly guides and for participation in neighborhood engagement. Neighborhood engagement also created a neighborhood leadership academy to help grow the leaders in the community and educate them on the city and our processes. They in turn can educate their neighbors. So it's sort of a neighbor to neighbor initiative. We've used public art. We've had a program where, intersection art where funding was provided to create this piece of work at an intersection. We also were working with Harvard Bloomberg on some of their art to asphalt initiatives. When the pandemic hit, the mayor took to communicating. We sort of had a Live at 5 Facebook where she was giving daily updates. And then also Milsey, shown on the picture on the right, is the director of neighborhood engagement. She would then also translate in Spanish so that we make sure we're reaching our neighbors. Similar to Vision Zero, the approach to the pandemic has been human scaled and multidisciplinary. The city funded murals by artists to encourage safe social distancing and mask wearing during the pandemic. So now back to the Vision Zero plan. This plan kicked off in March, days before that famed Friday the 13th of March, where everything shut down. We really had to pivot our approach. It was clear that many of the engagement activities that we had planned were not going to happen, such as open streets, pop-ups, working with the schools, summer parks programs just weren't going to work in 2020. So Kristen is going to take it from here.
Yeah. So something that was really clear to us from the beginning was that Lancaster's sort of commitment to, in that first trip, we actually took a trip March 6th, which was when the COVID-19 was kind of in the news and in the air, but no one really knew what it was going to happen yet, or what it was exactly. So it was a very strange time to, one of the last times I traveled was actually to Lancaster to hang out with Cindy for a day and a half. And we conducted a ton of interviews and really got to meet a lot of the community. And one thing that was really clear from the beginning was this commitment to community involvement 100% of the time that was really helpful anytime they took on a planning process. So yeah, we launched this project in March of 2020, the last trip we would ever take for a while. And I just also wanted to mention that this project was funded through the Pennsylvania Department of Health's program called WalkWorks, as well as a matching fund from the city of Lancaster. WalkWorks traditionally funds complete streets policies and active transportation plans. Hopefully you're all familiar with the program. If not, you should definitely look it up. This was their first Vision Zero plan, which was really exciting. So we got to work pretty closely with Carol, who's the organizer of WalkWorks, to kind of work through the first Vision Zero plan. So as you all know, March 2020 really brought on a lot of changes. And some of this resulted in some striking things in transportation. We saw as well as the disturbing news that we were watching the nation go through, we also saw some disturbing traffic trends as traffic volumes decreased. Some places saw rises in their serious injuries and fatalities due to some of those speed issues that Seth spoke about, as well as other factors. So because we couldn't really show up to neighborhoods, we had planned in the beginning to show up to a lot of the great summer activities in Lancaster and the street fairs and really meet people where they are. That became much, much harder in the time of COVID. But luckily with the Department of Neighborhoods that Cindy talked about, we were able to work with them to really recruit neighborhood leaders or recruit residents to serve on a neighborhood advisory committee. So these were really recruited by neighborhood leaders who really took a concerted effort to get the representation they were looking for. So representation from every quadrant of the city, and also really took an effort to get representation from people who had been involved in crashes themselves. So all 5 people here have been involved in crashes as a pedestrian or a bicyclist. So really brought that personal experience to the Vision Zero plan. So we really, wanted to continue neighbors talking to neighbors. We kept them informed throughout the plan, asked for their input, and gave them some assignments to gather information from their friends and neighbors. And this sort of strong network that I think the city tries to exhibit all the time, but really helps during a planning process, especially when you're trying to embark on a complicated planning process during a pandemic, such as we were. So we also sent out postcards. We couldn't really, meet people in the street like we wanted to, but we tried to meet them at their home. So we sent out postcards along the High Endry corridors, encouraging people to talk with their neighbors and also interact with the map. And the map I'm talking about is an online interactive map where we ask people to give their feedback on 6 different categories you see here. We got a ton of really great feedback. The city did a great job pushing this out on all social media platforms and keeping the website updated and making sure that people knew that this was available to them. So you could put a comment in on any of these 6 categories. You could also vote on others' comments, and you could also comment on other people's comments. So it was pretty interactive. And for this, we used the Wikimap, the company. So we got a lot of great information from that map, and I'm really just going to touch on a few things today. So one thing that we found really interesting and a great place to build on is that most respondents to the map had not heard of Vision Zero. So this is just asking the question, have you heard of Vision Zero? So 53% had not heard of Vision Zero at all. And I think that, especially right after hearing Seth's presentation, 15% of the cities in the major cities in the country have Vision Zero plan, and it's been in the news. And it's interesting to hear that, only 10% know a lot about Vision Zero, 16% know some, and the large majority know a little or have not heard of Vision Zero. So that's a lot to build on and really shaped some of our outreach choices. Another thing that we really found interesting is that a lot of the, you can kind of see the comment spread here, the different categories. As we're talking about sort of a culture change and changing behavior, I think everyone on this call knows that driver behaviors can be influenced by things like street design. But I found it interesting that most commenters, I don't think, are thinking about that when they're making comments, and they're really saying that this place is dangerous because of unsafe driver behavior. So it's a little bit, we are still placing the blame on the user, and I think it's just important to keep that in mind as you're taking on Vision Zero. So when we started developing our High Endry network, so a High Endry network, this is kind of the next step in the process. A High Endry network is the mapping of corridors where high numbers of people have been killed or severely injured in traffic crashes. And what this map does is it helps the city focus limited resources and also to build greater public and political buy-in for change. So we started looking at the total crashes. Lancaster is a pretty small city, and so there aren't too many fatal and serious crashes, which is a great thing. But we are, so in the years for this study, it was between 2014 and 2018, which showed a total of 3,462 total crashes. 73 of those, or 2%, resulted in a fatality or serious injury. Another important number that we wanted to look at, most of the stats we look at as transportation planners represent the number or the location of crashes. This chart actually looks at the number of people involved in the crashes. So 8,159 people are involved in crashes every single year. And this is a pretty astonishing number to us. This doesn't even represent the family members, friends, and neighborhoods that have had their lives changed because of some of these crashes. Of those crashes, bicycle crashes, pedestrian crashes, and motorcycle crashes are significantly overrepresented in the crashes that result in a fatality or serious injury. So the chart on the left is showing the crashes by all modes, and the chart on the right is just the crashes that result in fatality or serious injury. And a lot of this is due to kind of what Seth talked about, just, you know, our body has limits as far as what it can take in a crash, and pedestrians and bicyclists are not, and motorcyclists are not surrounded by a structure designed to prevent injury, like a vehicle. So as we developed the high injury network, we looked at we compared the street network to the serious crash locations and the locations of all bicycle and pedestrian crashes. So we looked at bicycle and pedestrian crashes. We looked at all severity levels, and that's because Seth showed a chart similar to this as well. But the reason we looked at data from all bicycle and pedestrian crashes is because the difference between a pedestrian or bicyclist walking away from a crash can be the difference of just a few miles an hour. And the difference between a car traveling at 30 miles an hour and 20 miles an hour is really, really important. And by dropping speeds just 10 miles an hour, you can reduce that fatality and severe injury risk by more than half. So we did include all the bike ped crashes. So this is showing the high injury network map. These orange lines represent some or all of 27 different streets. And it's just important to point out here that the high injury network, and this is true for most cities that take on Vision Zero, is a very small percentage of the total streets in the city. It is more than, you know, even though it's only 6% of the streets in the city, it's more than three-fourths of the serious and fatal injuries occur on those streets, and 2/3 of the bicycle and pedestrian crashes occur on 6% of the streets. You know, looking at these maps side by side, looking at the high injury network as well as the functional class, it's pretty clear that Lancaster's high injury network is comprised of major and minor arterials, and generally the widest and fastest streets in the city. Also a factor, there are a higher concentration of crashes in low-income communities, communities of color, or communities with low car ownership. We used the focus areas that the city of Lancaster developed in the county of Lancaster developed in the county's active transportation plan. So these characteristics were used in the active transportation plan, and the focus areas only represent 14% of the city's land area, but are home to 26% of the serious and fatal crashes. So we took all this into account, the data, community feedback, to develop actionable recommendations. We also took into account Lancaster's history of community engagement and thinking about how we can use some of those creative approaches to take on Vision Zero. So we thought about recommendations of each of these levels in the spectrum of prevention. So the levels at the top of this chart have the broadest impact and require the least amount of personal responsibility. So actually changing policy and legislation. But we really took a comprehensive approach, looking for recommendations at all levels and both short and long-term recommendations. So I'm going to go through a few of those recommendations, and we organized them in Vision Zero basics, so those items that are really included in most plans that we see and most plans that we work on, things that are kind of beyond the basics, and then things that are uniquely Lancaster, so things that pertain to Lancaster streets, their cultural environment, or their capabilities as a city. So typically in Vision Zero projects, you see a call for actually branding all projects around Vision Zero to make sure people know, why their streets being disrupted, and they understand that this is a safety project. You see a lot of improvements for crosswalks, of course, improvements on the high injury network, using some of the techniques that Seth talked about to reach the high injury network to operate more slowly and more safely. We also included staff training so that everyone on staff really knows exactly what they're doing and is using the same language. And I think another important one that is a really low-hanging fruit, but really impactful, is the use of standard Vision Zero language. So one of the recommendations in the plan is actually to create and provide Vision Zero language key to local news and media outlets to make sure that everyone's using the same language to avoid victim blaming, like Seth talked about. And just simple things like calling a crash and not an accident. So we're gonna, that's one of the recommendations, is to just provide that sort of prompt to media outlets. And then of course, the plan will result in annual reporting and updated or consolidated design guidelines to use some of those new designs that Seth talked about. So some of the beyond the basics pieces are, the city is planning on forming a crash analysis team, which Cindy is going to talk about in a minute. And then also just making sure that they're improving their crash data system and method of collecting that data. They're going to work with PennDOT and the hospital to kind of improve those systems. A lot of Lancaster's high injury network is on state roads. So a big part of the plan is really advocating for change on those roads. And then also Lancaster really wanted to take on a holistic approach to evaluating the speeds on the entire high injury network. So making sure they're appropriate for the type of street that they're on, and maybe using that new NACDO guide that Seth pointed out to decide what the appropriate speed is. So this is a big part of Vision Zero is looking at intersections. Most crashes happen at an intersection. Actually, 63% of Lancaster's fatal and serious injury crashes occur at intersections. And for pedestrians and bicyclists, those numbers are higher. 68% of pedestrian crashes occur at intersections, and 78% of bicyclist crashes occur at intersections. So these are showing the top intersections, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Cindy to talk a little bit about the crash analysis team.
Thanks, Kristen. Yes, we formed a crash analysis team that was looking at the top 10 locations that Kristen mentioned, but my goal with this also is just to start looking at the risks so that, that were mentioned at the last presentation I was in, talking about the FHWA systemic evaluations. It's identifying those risk factors so we can be applying improvements sort of system-wide to be dealing with a lot of these. These are two of the locations, King Street at Water Street, which is a signalized intersection, and then Prince at Farnham, which is an unsignalized intersection. The team includes city engineers and planning staff, MPO staff, police, someone from the transit agency as well. And we're looking to identify some of the patterns and identify how we can be identifying long and short-term solutions. We've worked with the police closely throughout this process. We have traffic commission meetings where we receive complaints a lot. So, this is a key partnership for us in developing solutions. And looking at Prince Street, PennDOT is currently coming through with a repaving project. So we've been in discussions with them about, instead of just replacing the pavement markings as they currently exist, can we're able to get high visibility piano style crosswalks at all the intersections, signalized and unsignalized, and looking at adding a parking lane line, just trying to identify some of those things that would help slow vehicles through the city. We're also working with PennDOT to improve the access that we as a municipality have to crash data. Currently as a municipality, we were not eligible to receive that more detailed data. We were just only could have that public data set. So we recently were able to work that out with PennDOT and are going to be getting that data as well. So these are just some of the things that we're working on with the crash evaluation team. So, continuing with that culture of engagement with the community, the Slow Streets program we'd like to start will begin with the neighborhoods. So involving neighborhoods in that process is key for us, because we hear it consistently that it's an issue for the livability of people in the city. So we want to address that. We've had success in converting 2 streets from one-way to two-way, so we're continuing to evaluate that option. And similar to Love Your Block, we're identifying opportunities to fund community organizations to be part of the Zero initiatives. Here's just an example of the one-way street. This is Charlotte Street that was converted to two-way. You can tell it changes the look and feel. And that's one of the big things that we're trying to advocate for in the city, is ensuring that, you know, it's a pleasant experience for people to be within the public right of way, and pleasant and safe. So, and then, like, one other thing we wanted to touch on was that we were really excited that we had a resident on the steering committee, Kristen Krimmel, who is also a teacher at the school district of Lancaster. And, you know, she's very involved in the neighborhood groups within the city. But she took, you know, as Tool was presenting this information related to Vision Zero and the impact of speeds and how they impact, you know, the forces associated with them, how the likelihood of a pedestrian being able to survive those crashes based on the speed. She took that and ran with it. She created a curriculum for her 8th grade class around Vision Zero, and, you know, she's making it available to other teachers as well. So we thought this is a great symbol for the systemic approach, not only in education, but education of future drivers. So we were really excited about that initiative. So just to sort of sum it up, my boss calls our Vision Zero plan the crown jewel of the Department of Public Works. And, you know, I tend to agree, being involved in this plan. So, and, you know, this is the plan that's going to guide us to ensure that everyone is able to experience safer streets in the city of Lancaster. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Cindy. Actually, I have a question myself here. Is with the city of Lancaster being as small as it is, about what, 60,000 people, is there any tips you could provide, you know, to other communities that might be looking at this that aren't, you know, the size of some of our first and second class cities, but are looking at these concepts? You know, because these are things that any community can do, whether it's under a Vision Zero umbrella or not. But I think sometimes that term might scare some of those suburban communities away from it. Is there any tips you could give to them?
I would say to you know, engage with some professionals. You know, it wasn't a super expensive venture to create this plan. So engaging with professionals. I believe LTAP even has some, you know, the PennDOT's local assistance program has programs on road safety plans. So I think that would be also a great resource in identifying, you know, how to prioritize. You know, and there's a lot of data available. Just the public crash data that PennDOT has available is also very helpful. But working with police, you know, those are all great places to start.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it open to here for just another minute or so. If there's any other questions, you know, we encourage you to use the you can use the chat box or the Q&A form, and we can get those addressed for you. I appreciate all 73 people hanging around to the end on Friday. You know, this is coming to the end of the conference, and we do appreciate everybody sticking it through to the end.
I think while we're waiting for some questions, which we'd love, I think one lesson I've really taken from working with Lancaster is I know we maybe drove it home in the slides, but just the value of having that sort of continued outreach, so that when you need, you know, when you're in the middle of a pandemic and you still want to get a really important plan done, or when you have questions for the community, they really had the ability to kind of get some of their questions answered, because they have a really strong network with their community. And I think that just should be a lesson to all cities. I'm a former city employee as well. I used to work for the city of Pittsburgh, and I think it's just been a joy to work with Lancaster. And I think that's a really good lesson for all cities, to really continue that engagement all the time, so that so that it's more just genuine. So you're not like inventing it for a plan. We thought that was really helpful.
Very good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just say that it's really inspiring to see what you're doing in Lancaster. All the very thoughtful kind of systems approach and how you're developing, basically your coalition seems like you're kind of developing a safety culture there too. I mean, it's just remarkable. Look forward to seeing where you guys head from here, especially once we, get past this pandemic.
We're all looking forward to getting past the pandemic.
Yes, indeed.
I was supposed to be at Lancaster's Open Streets.
Oh gosh, yeah. Remember those?
Yeah. There will be.
It's striking how much has changed.
I guess with that, we're not seeing any other questions coming in here. We can wrap it up here. Thank you
All right.
to all the presenters for great presentations here. Thank you. Oh, wait,
Looks
on.
like Frank has a question there.
Yeah. So Frank, some Vision Zero plan timelines have been pushed back ostensibly to allow more time for automotive technology such as passive pedestrian detection to become more mainstream. What do you think these technologies will become as important to the road as road design?
That's a really, really good question. I'll try to take a stab because it's really hard to know, right? Until they're deployed in mass in different contexts and stuff, it's really hard to see. To the extent, Frank, that they adhere to principles of human factors, perception, and that they're done with the community rather than to the community, I think that they could have a sizable impact. Now, will it be as important as road design? It's a fair question. If it's integrated with road design, I think it could probably enhance. I'm thinking of examples like we've seen from NSF, where there's an example of guiding people with low vision across a mid-block crossing. There's some good technology there that can give them a sense of what the traffic environment's like and help them basically assist them crossing the street. That's something that takes kind of human factors and human abilities into, and I think that could probably be, really effective at improving safety among a subpopulation. But I don't know what you guys think, Chris and Cindy.
Yeah, I think it's going to be something, I had a loaner car not that long ago, and I was just amazed at how much it could be, what it did to improve safety as far as, sensing different things. And so I think it's definitely something that's going to help. But I don't think it's something where we should stop what we're doing related to Vision Zero. I think we need to continue on this path to try and make things better from our point of view, as designers, and sort of that culture change that, maybe we didn't highlight as much here, but just trying to change the attitude about speeding and, different things that are sort of accepted in our society, and, people being more conscious of those impacts. So I think that's all things that we need to be working on.
Yeah, and Frank's point about passive pedestrian detection, that's actually something that IHS, or the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety, is actually starting to look at. That they provide those ratings, the 5-star rating system. They're starting to look at, pedestrian detection and automated braking in the presence of pedestrians, and starting to test that. So basically getting the industry aligned with, and, so that they incorporate those technologies more in their vehicles. Speed governors have been, right? Intelligent speed assistance, that's something that could probably help too.
That goes to your slide about the horsepower of vehicles.
Oh, buddy.
Increasing.
We saw an advertisement actually for Dodge vehicles, and I'm not going to throw them under the bus, but it was an actual advertisement they put out there that you would get some money off if you went for higher horsepower. So that was kind of interesting. They're kind of incentivizing you to get a more powerful machine.
All car commercials show empty streets with no no traffic and no obstructions where you can go. Just aren't really based in reality, and a lot of these plans are, which is, I think, in conflict. I think the sort of speed technology is probably, you know, the most applicable to some of the Vision Zero plans, because even if you can detect a pedestrian, if you're going too fast, you still can't stop in time unless you can detect them, you know, 100 feet in front of you. And I don't know if it's gonna, I don't know if the technology is getting that good, but the idea of having some pace cars on the street and some cars that are really setting the pace for the rest of traffic and going the speed limit because they're using a speed governor or some technology like that, I think it, you know, is really interesting and could affect things. But I think it also doesn't get to the pleasant street design, even if the streets are filled with robot cars that don't hit anything. I think pedestrians and bicyclists would still use the street more if it were designed better. So I think we still have to keep working on our design changes.
Yeah. Yeah. Safety should be a foundational goal, but not necessarily the only goal, right? Yeah.
Thanks for that question.
Yeah. All right, Joe, what do you think?
Okay, yeah, not seeing anything else coming in, so I think we can call this a wrap. Thanks again.
Thank you,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah. You too.
Yep.